Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm going to let a minute or two go by just so people can log in. Thank you all for coming. Alrighty, I'm going to keep it short and sweet on my end. I'm Danielle Angeliri, and I'm the Executive Director of NAMI Northern Illinois, who is an affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We serve Winnebago and Boone County and are dedicated to improving lives of individuals and families touched by mental illness through support, education, advocacy, and hope. So tonight we have Therasa Yehling for part 2 of our trauma series. Tonight we're going to talk about PTSD and complex PTSD, and just a couple of updates on our end. We do have our annual event. Oh, you can't hear me? Can you hear me, Therasa?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Carol. Can you hear me now? Hopefully. We do have our annual event coming up June 7th at Forest Hills Country Club, Mulligans for Mental Illness. I do want to say happy Mental Health Month to everybody. Some of you may be aware we're doing a daily challenge every day to kind of instill new habits, maybe just challenge you a little bit to take care of your mental well-being, because as we all know, we all have mental health. We might not have mental illness, but we do all have mental health. And today's challenge was to drink more water. So I'm trying to follow that. Sparkling water, but that still counts, I think. Next week, we have a virtual mental health fair on Monday, which you can find information on that on our website to register. And then next Tuesday, we have an update from the Winnebago County Mental Health Board, just kind of what they've been doing since their inception last year, and maybe they'll tell you who the grant dollars went to as well. But without further ado, I will introduce Therasa again. And if you guys do have any questions for her, please feel free to write them in the question and answer section, and I'd be happy to read them. Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. I'm assuming that everybody can hear me. I am not muted and all that good stuff. So again, Therasa Yehling. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I am the manager of the OSF Healthcare Strive Trauma Recovery Center. It's such a mouthful. Really, I just say Trauma Recovery Center here. And what does that mean? Really quick, it's a program that actually is modeled after a program in San Francisco that has been in existence for over 15 years or something like that, and had really shown great outcomes to the point that they patented it and started selling it to the states. At this time, we are like one of 34, I believe it is, trauma recovery centers around the country with a national sort of presence, and it continues to grow. There's some really great work going on around trauma, and specifically this grant that is creating these trauma recovery centers, which is through VOCA, violence for like crime victims compensation, and funds go into that pocket of money through like the Violence Against Women's Act. I mean, it's all funneled. This program is to work with those that have experienced or witnessed violence, and that they were a witness or a victim of that crime. So of a violent crime. So we know that violence can have long-lasting mental and emotional effects. Our major goal is to attempt to remove all barriers to have folks be able to access our services. And that service is having therapy with licensed therapists who are going to be certified in trauma therapies. We also have counseling that can happen with like the case managers, advocacy, so really a supportive network of a team. So the advocacy, if any issues arise that you think you need us to advocate on your behalf with you, we're going to be there for you. Court, landlord, medical reasons, whatever. And we have sort of what we call an aggressive outreach coordinator that really tries to keep clients either involved in our services, like if they've dropped out all of a sudden, or let's say they're on a waiting list because they can't get in. Well, we're not there yet, but if we were ever to have a waiting list, that person is to go out and meet with these folks to make sure that if they have emergency needs, those emergency needs are met, to give some type of supportive counseling, and to maybe do some case management. And at some point, we will also have telepsychiatry. We just have to find a psychiatrist or a nurse practitioner to contract with. And, that's difficult to find. And, that's around the country. There's just a shortage. So, and all our services then are provided for free because it's all grant-based. And eligibility, they need to meet all these requirements. So they must be a resident of Winnebago County. They need to be 14 years or older at this time. Again, must be a victim or a witness of a violent crime. They're currently experiencing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm going to go briefly through that. Again, because I did last month, and maybe some of you weren't on here watching, but acute post-traumatic stress, having some of those symptoms, and they're currently not receiving any mental health counseling. And what I mean by that is some people may be in counseling for, let's say, maybe substance abuse even, or something completely different than what we would do, because our program is supposed to be kind of intensive, up to about 16 weeks. We can extend it up to 32, but it's a really intensive wraparound service to really help people be able to manage their symptoms of PTSD and or complex trauma. So, and we are actually here at OSF St. Anthony Medical Center, and this is our information. If you have questions, you can always call. We can take referrals through our email, our fax, phone. So yes, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. So let's talk about a little bit about trauma then. So trauma, we always think of, it's a traumatic event. What does that really mean? Well, it causes us, to have physical harm, emotional, spiritual. We never really think about that sometimes, or psychological harm to us. It's the person experiencing the distressing event, right? May feel physically threatened or extremely frightened as a result. Okay. And so, we look at trauma and, these then are some of those possible symptoms of then PTSD, but you can have afterwards intrusive memories. Just think of, I don't know if anybody's been in a car accident, but if you have, and I won't tell my story of my first car accident right at 16 years old when I just got my license, but I certainly can remember it because it was pretty traumatic. And so it's something that just sticks in the brain, right? You may have panic attacks, shame, self-hatred, startle response. We talk about this all the time. They're very hyper vigilant. Any noise, they jump. Can't handle or are overwhelmed by their senses. So certain noises are too loud. Certain smells may be too much. It's too overpowering. All of a sudden, because it might depend on the trauma that they've experienced and what senses were affected while they were experiencing that trauma. Chronic pain, headaches, a lot of physical issues, numbing, loss of interest, irritability, all kinds of things. And really flashbacks, nightmares, you can see all that on there. And then, little or no memories too, and this can be a way that your brain is trying to keep you safe. People don't think of it that way, especially if you're trying to like go to court or something like that. Court isn't really able to deal with what a trauma victim may sound like in court. Because depending on how long the trauma's been going on and all these factors, they may appear as though they're lying because one minute they have memories, the next minute they don't, or wait, they've added on more and this, but that's how our brain works when it comes to trauma. It only releases what we think it can, what the brain thinks it can handle. So it's almost like, when I've talked to clients, I'm like, you're almost like having to talk to your brain, almost like you're two separate entities. But and we're trying to get you two on the same page because there's a part of you that knows, like with clients in therapy, part of you knows that you're safe, but then there's this other part that's like, no, we're still in trauma. So it's tough. These are some of the, so when we talk about response to trauma, I think people hear all the time about fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And with these kind of, which I thought was interesting about this poster or slide that I found was, if you look at it, it says, oh, if you fight, it's you're aggressive, you're angry, you're fighting, you're clawing your way. But also we may have some misdiagnosis, and this happens a lot, especially when, the system is set up, and this is by, insurance and whatnot, that you may only have an hour to meet with someone to do an assessment, and you're not going to get to maybe all the trauma that has been going on or all of the symptoms in an hour when you're trying to get their whole life story in 1 hour. And so they are mislabeled, maybe narcissistic, as a narcissist, sociopath, conduct disorder. We get that a lot with, teens. If you're running flight, you're out of here, you don't want to have anything to do with this. You might be obsessive compulsive, right? OCD, panicky, anxiety ridden, workaholic, everything, because you're running, you're hiding, you don't want to deal with it. So you are going here, you're going there. Oh, yeah, I'm busy. Okay, I've got that. Because if you were to sit in that silence, your brain would let you know what's going on inside, and you don't want to go there. So they feel like if they were to feel those feelings, they wouldn't be able to come back, and they don't know what they would do. They don't know how to gather themselves together to keep on going. They're afraid. So typically mislabeled, OCD, bipolar. We see that a lot. Especially with adults, and teens now, which, when I first, and I'm older, so, I've been doing this for over 25 years. I remember when I received my master's, we were taught not to give a diagnosis to a teenager as bipolar because they naturally look bipolar. I mean, if I have a 5-year-old right now, I could probably label him as bipolar, but my husband and I call him one of the Sour Patch Kids from the commercial. 1 minute he's sweet and then he's sour. That's a normal 5-year-old, but teenagers too. So we have to be careful about that, but also panic disorder, mood disorder. Then there's the whole freeze. You space out, you feel unreal. Like you're just almost like you're floating through life, like difficult to make decisions. I don't know what to do. You feel dead inside, lifeless. It is that almost feeling of starting to almost disassociate, get your the sense of you, your emotional part of you, is being extracted. It's, sort of, you're just not, oh, okay. I mean, and I'm sure folks like this. My aunt was like this. I mean, you'd ask her, well, I don't know. Sure. They can't, you're like, hello, what's going on? Well, this is, something they haven't, you've shut down. Your body cannot handle, your brain can't handle releasing these memories or releasing the feelings that go along with trauma. So again, mislabeled clinical depression. Makes sense. Brain fog, you're dissociating, you're kind of not doing anything. Schizophrenia, which I'm like, what? Well, if you're disassociating, you're leaving your body almost, right? You don't know where you're at. You don't know what's going on. So schizophrenia, possibly ADD, because you can't get anything done. You start over here maybe a little, and then you're like, oh, that's too hard. I'm overwhelmed. I'll go over here a little. So it looks like you can't get anything done. And then it says dissociative identity disorder. That usually is not something that you should be labeling someone, after maybe they've only had issues where the trauma came from maybe serving in the military. Well, that started at adult time, and really dissociative identity disorder is, you know, the splitting off of the personalities. And that's when the brain is really developing. So as a child, you'll see this being formed. And it's, again, it's a smart coping skill that is amazing to see, and amazing that our brains can do that and cut certain things off. And then it says fawn, and I was like, fawn? What do you mean? Well, people pleasing, you know, you're scared to say anything to anybody, you try to avoid conflict, over caring, you do everything for everyone. Well, it also keeps you busy, right? Don't have to think about yourself because you're thinking about everybody else, but everybody else is all drama, right? So it keeps you busy. You know, that whole thing of circus and monkeys, you know, not my circus, not my monkeys. Well, you try to make everything your circus and your monkeys. You try to make everything to where you have to help in some way. And you just, you know, somebody says jump, you jump, and you say how high. And really, we usually will say, well, they're codependent, quote unquote, victim instead of a survivor. And so, you know, you may have, and it even says down here, you know, most people have at least one or two dominant stress responses that they typically fall back, you know, on to get you through things that trigger you. And I think that's most of us, right? You know, if you get scared, gosh, you know, driving along and you think somebody's going to hit you all of a sudden, oh my God, I about, you know, your heart's pounding, you know, all of that stuff where you know, something, you know, your typical sort of reaction to things. But if it's constant and it's, well, it's becoming an issue to where you aren't able to live a, you know, what we would say, quote unquote, a normal life. Well, what's normal, really? But it's become maladaptive. You can't adapt to your life, your surroundings. Then we've got, you know, an issue with your mental health. Okay. So brain processing, then, I mean, when we look at the brain and we're looking at how it's developed and the wire, and I'm not, believe me, I'm not going through all of this. I am in no way uh, able to do all that. However, it is important to understand that your brain, it says, like, regularly scans for real or perceived threats. So, and it says it's filtered through your limbic system, where we instinctively react to that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, you know, all of that, right? Well, here's the deal. When you're dealing with trauma, especially if it's over and over and over again, like a child being abused, you can take that child out of that abusive situation. And when it's calm, their brain still is scanning. It's constantly scanning what's going on. So any little thing, a bug can fly by and you think somebody's trying to hit you. And then you go, what? That doesn't make any sense. But your brain is going, no, there's danger. There's danger everywhere. There's danger, danger, danger. Your brain doesn't shut off. So you see everything as a threat. And so how do you calm down? How do you sleep? I mean, these are the things that are part of the problem. And then, so it says when a threat is perceived, your amygdala, you know, alerts the hypothalamus and it releases all these stress hormones. I mean, you're constantly stressed. And you probably don't eat right. You don't eat at all. You're not sleeping. You can't make decisions. I mean, that's all of this is going on. And reaction to that fight or flight, you know, freeze, fawn response, you know, you have fear, frustration, and, you know, heartache, and the mind, you can't concentrate, you know. You may have prior childhood adult trauma, you know, will increase, obviously. So if you had prior childhood issues of, you know, of some type of abuse, trauma, and now you're an adult and something happens, it's going to trigger, and it's going to have you experience all the things that you once experienced, maybe when you were younger, bring up all the things that you were trying to forget. So it really can result in that disassociating or numbing feeling. And so again, last month they had talked about the DSM-5 and the criteria for then PTSD, exposure to that actual or threatened death, serious injury, sexual violence, in one or more of the following ways. So you look at like, well, what have they been exposed to? And then you're looking at intrusive thoughts and symptoms, flashbacks, dreams, intrusive memories. Like all of a sudden you're standing there and you're right where the incident happened in your mind, because you're right back there. And we see that, and people can kind of understand that when we talk about veterans, that all of a sudden, like, something triggers them to feel like they're back in the war. They can smell it, they can taste it, they can everything, they're there. Well, that's what this is sort of like talking about. And you will probably then avoid any stimuli, anything that would possibly be associated with the trauma. You'll avoid it like the plague. If you were, stabbed or shot on the corner of blah, 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 you're going to possibly avoid that corner the rest of your life. Or some people, it was in my house, the violence, they sell their house. They can't be there. And not to say that that's wrong per se, but it's going along with, all these other things to make it sort of hard to live and adapt to your environment. So then you have negative sort of alterations in the way we think, and our mood then is associated with this traumatic event. And you can't recall maybe all the details, or you don't want to do anything. So then it looks like this depression that might be happening. And then you kind of feel really detached from people because maybe nobody knows what's going on. You were sexually assaulted and you don't want to tell anyone. Especially teenagers, or, and now they're pregnant, or, there's a lot of things that can happen that can quote unquote help you have these symptoms of PTSD and then possibly get diagnosed. And you also have this marked alteration of arousal and reactivity, and, and it's, everything is difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, reckless, destructive behavior, drugs, alcohol, running away from home, and then children or kids, teens, whatever, they get involved with human trafficking. But they also have difficulty concentrating. They're hypervigilant about, again, noise and whatnot. And they have that exaggerated startle response. A door shuts and they're like, they jump, and you're like, all it was the door. What's the problem? Well, and not to say that that means somebody has PTSD. It's just that it's all of these things put together. So if you look at brain images, you can, and I know these have gone around the world and then some for a long time, but you can see that colors are changing in the brain, PTSD versus no PTSD. So something's changing in the brain. And if it's a growing brain, it's rewiring to cope. It's got to get through. It's got to cope. We are made to survive. And so our brain will change to help us survive. So, and you also then might have other unexpected, maybe physical symptoms than of PTSD. Like I said, the headaches, the fatigue, the ringing in the ears, oh gosh, pain, not to say everyone with fibromyalgia has been, had trauma in their past, but a good significant amount of folks with fibromyalgia usually have at least one incident, if not more, of some type of trauma. Because, you may not be talking about it. Your brain's trying to shut down and not release it. Well, it's going to come out one way or another. So I try to tell maybe teens, they're like, I don't need to talk about it. Or men who feel like, no, I can't talk about it because then I won't be seen as a real man. I mean, we're getting slowly but surely, I think, getting sort of out of that a little bit. But, you know, well, then you might have physical problems instead of, dealing with the depression, the anxiety, the PTSD. You're going to have other issues. So, here we then have, then we have complex PTSD. So complex then PTSD is, and it says is a condition from chronic, constant, it's long, and or long-term exposure to emotional trauma, in which a victim has little or no control. And that's really important. And from, which there is little or no hope of escaping. Okay. They have absolutely no control to change their situation. So we talk about domestic, emotional, but also physical, sexual abuse, childhood, entrapment or kidnapping, slavery or enforced labor, long-term imprisonment and torture, repeated violations of personal boundaries, long-term objectification, exposure to gaslighting and false accusations, long-term exposure to inconsistent push-pull from someone. They want you in their life, and then as soon as they get you, they push you away. Push-pull, constant. Splitting or alternating, this sort of rage and then hovering behaviors, kind of like when you hover over someone, that sort of, I'd say, very needy person. Long term, taking care of maybe a mentally ill or chronically sick family member, which I can certainly attest to that with my grandmother and my mother. And with my grandmother, I mean, we're talking when Singers was open and back when, and and she had a personality disorder, but later on in life, I don't know why she had like a Jewish New York accent. I don't know why. We're not Jewish, we're not from New York, but she would, say she had a little depression. I'm like, oh, okay. She really had a personality disorder, and it created a lot of issues within the family, with my mother being rageful, or because she had to take care of and help with someone who's mentally ill, and doing the gaslighting and the lying. Oh, it's a lot. Long-term exposure then to crisis, one crisis after another, homelessness, getting kicked out. Then you don't know where you're staying, and now you're in foster care, and all you have is a little bag of clothes, and then you're taken to another home. You don't know these people. Constant crisis, one after another. So also with the complex PTSD symptoms, they did a nice job here on this slide where they clustered it. So you can see like where the affect with regulation. So we talk about how hard it is to regulate their emotions, like anger, fear, shame, sadness. They can't regulate it. So control it in some way. So they are all over the place with their emotions. Problems with safety and impulse control. You might find the cutting behavior, alcohol or substance abuse, eating disorders, criminal behavior, that high risk stuff, problems with attention. Who can pay attention? I mean, I can't. If this were going on and continuing to go on, who can concentrate? Problems with your identity and self-perception. Now you have to try and figure out who you're supposed to be when all this is going on. how? There's nothing stable. There's nothing that you can land on and then just flourish. It's a constant moving target. So then your body image or self image is going to be then constantly moving. So you can't figure it out. And also medical neglect. So not taking your pills, not showering when you should, you know, maybe taking not taking your doctor's advice around whatever. I mean, and also the risky behavior. So it says problems with systems of meaning. So the self is seen. You see yourself as damaged goods. There is nothing that could repair this person. That's how they feel. There's nothing you could do because I am intrinsically you cannot repair it at all. They feel shame. They blame themselves. They don't trust many people. They really do believe in the responsibility for what's going on. And that they cannot control the situation. So they have an intense focus on control. So it can go one way or another. They can either identify it constantly in other people and trying to argue about that and trying to take it, or they're constantly have to be in control. They have to. Otherwise, if they're not, there's a lot of anxiety. And the world is seen as dangerous and untrustworthy, and that's it. There's no safe place. And they end up taking the perspective of the abuser and rationalize with that perpetrator. And it's hard for us to see that. I know when I worked in foster care and saw one woman choose her boyfriend who was a sexual predator over her children, I was like, what is going on? But you find out that in her past, she was sexually abused by her father. And so she's like, what? Well, kind of makes sense if you're constantly in that. How can you not? Also know that maybe you better rationalize with them because maybe that keeps you safe. Problems with relationships and attachments. You're either too attached or not attached, or mistrust. And there's no way that you can attach properly, and it's very disorganized, and you will have repeated unsafe or violent relationships because you don't, that's what you know. How are you supposed to unknow that all of a sudden? So it makes sense. So bunch of characteristics that you can have where you're, it'll say, rage turned inward, rage turned outward. You will see people react in ways. So rage inward, where, the suicide, the cutting, the whatever, emotional breakdowns, all of that. And it's, about the rage. When it says other, it's learned hypervigilance or a really clouded perception of reality, of what's really going on, seeking positions of power or control. Gotta, because that's how you can stay safe, not because they're narcissistic. There's a lot of avoidance, we said, blaming ourselves. Oh, everything is a catastrophe. Everything, because it is. You don't know how it's supposed to be any other way. The control me syndrome, it's a tendency which some people have to foster a relationship with people who have a controlling, sort of narcissistic or antisocial or acting out nature. And I think it's because it's what you know. How could you this is what you've learned. This is how it's supposed to go. You try to deny what's going on as a coping mechanism. You get dependent on folks that are inappropriate, or reliant on other people that you really shouldn't rely on. Depression, and it's, when it says non, PD, it's really that you feel sadder than your circumstances dictate. So we may see people with sometimes what comes to mind when I think of that is folks that might have a personality where they're considered very sensitive to the world and what's around them. So they may actually be crying uncontrollably for someone that they may know that had a loved one die, let's say, but they've never met the loved one. They barely know this person, but they just met, maybe they've only known them for a little while, but they will be sobbing like it was their mother who died, their close relationship, mother that had died. And you're like, wow, this doesn't match. I don't understand. Well, you can't regulate. There's no way to regulate it. So you're all over the place. Escape to fantasy. Well, I would too. I mean, I do it on all these team meetings. I have to have the beach behind me. I mean, aren't we all trying to? But you gotta cope. So I'm gonna go over here. Boy, fear of abandonment. That's a big one. Irrational belief of being just discarded, rejected. And it is huge, especially with children who have been constantly abused. You have relationship, so hyper vigilant, very unhealthy, very intense, and then not. You got to learn helplessness, can't go anywhere. You have low self-esteem, panic attacks, perfectionism, selective memory, all that kind of stuff. It's self-loathing, big one. And then tunnel vision too. What it feels like when people suffer from this, they're uncentered, they're shaky. Any minute somebody's pulling that rug out, any minute. And they feel compelled to get away from others and be by themselves. And they don't know how to be. And they feel like everything is just about to go out the window, everything all the time. They catastrophize everything. It's a problem. Here you see brain development of extreme neglect. So, and that can be part of trauma with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. You can see a normal sized brain of a 3-year-old. What's going on here when you have extreme neglect? Not much development. This is a problem. And then we have a healthy brain and an abused brain. Again, you can see there's differences. There are things not even lighting up that probably should be lit up. In other areas, we're seeing more activity. And again, this is, to show that, they've got to use other areas of their brain, and it's probably to, quote unquote, keep them safe somehow to survive. So the differences here, PTSD and complex PTSD, again, you both have this re-experiencing of the symptoms. You both try to avoid. You both have a sense of threat. Complex PTSD, though, affect, you cannot regulate your affect. You have a very, very negative self-concept. You are bad internally, intrinsically, and you cannot be helped in any way. No one can help you. And you have interpersonal disturbances within yourself. I mean, you and it's because of that shame and guilt. You cannot develop fully into who you should be. And if you look at the misdiagnosis again of complex trauma, where we have, and really it's this misdiagnosis because, well, really the DSM still has not put complex trauma in there as an actual diagnosis, even though it's, they really do believe it should be in there. So we as folks that, you know, that can do diagnosing, we still have to put PTSD, but then we put on there other circumstances to show that it's complex trauma. It's not just PTSD. Because if you see, then, you know, there's all these other things that are going on. But then what is a misdiagnosis is borderline. What I see a lot of times is that, especially with teenage girls, we get borderline and bipolar. And we're not looking at the complex trauma piece because we're not, either we don't have time, we can't have time to go through their trauma history. So you'll see with borderline, there's a shifting of self-identity. So they'll identify here, there, wherever. They just want to avoidance of real or imagined abandonment, and disassociate, and paranoia. So you can see that there's these 3 different levels, but borderline is a huge one that we get all the time. I'm like, they're not, they just kind of look like it. So embracing change. How do we do that then? You know, it's really that you've learned these ineffective beliefs and behaviors, and we can actually replace them with a positive mindset and trying to promote healthy behaviors. And we do that by trying to, you know, do certain therapies that help you rewire the brain. So one thing that maybe we can do when you're older, right? Not when you're a child. So this is hard. Remove yourself from those situations. Okay, sure. But you got to seek therapy, individual and or group. Talk about it, write about it, get it out. Meditate, self-care, medication if you need it, physical exercise. But also what I like is rewrite the script of your life. It's learning that you actually have control over your life and that you get to be and do, and you get to write your life. You get to decide. And so that's a huge thing with complex trauma is we really try to help in therapy, help them understand that they really, and these are adults usually, that they can rewrite their life and that they have control. If you can get a client to understand that in a way that is empowering, with all these other things that are going on, you know, they can do this. They can end up being possibly in a positive mindset and, you know, have this promotion of healthy behaviors like drinking water, which, you know, I'm terrible at myself. But I think those are the big differences when you look at, whoops, I didn't mean to do that, but well, I guess I could exit from that. But if, you know, you look at the differences, there are a lot of differences. It is not just an event or 2 or whatever that, and that everybody then has PTSD. It is not like that at all. It is complex because it's layer after layer after layer of issues of trauma. And, you know, and when you think of many, many studies that have gone through, I mean, to show the effects of trauma. I mean, anybody can look at the ACE studies that have been done through, I mean, I think they've assessed maybe over 17,000 people. I mean, that's a pretty significant amount. And it's like what, 10 questions? It's the adverse childhood experience. And the more you check, like if you have 8 traumas out of 10, well, the likelihood of you having possibly PTSD or complex trauma is much higher than if somebody who only gets a 1. And it's tied to our physical health. They know that people who have experienced complex trauma, like I said, the more you have, the more you probably got complex trauma, the more it's associated with early death, higher risk of many diseases. High blood pressure, probably diabetes, food cravings, addictions, immunity issues, so autoimmune kind of things, sleep disturbances, digestive issues. I mean, you name it, they're going to have chronic diseases, chronic pain. And so I think it is important, if we could, to really try and really pay attention to trauma histories to the best of our ability. And really, there are about 8 contributing factors to complex trauma, and it really is about the intensity, the duration, the timing. So again, as a child growing up, genetics has some things to do with it, because even if it's just like someone has an anxiety disorder already, some of those things, or depression or bipolar, you're going to possibly pass down some of those genes. But we also can look at generational sort of issues. Living in a home where someone may be depressed, you learn depression, but you may not be necessarily depressed. So your environment can also then help with developing some of these maladaptive symptoms. Family dynamics, how we model to our children, learning disabilities of some sort, lack of resiliency. Well, they still haven't really figured out how one person is resilient and the other person, you can take twins and one does well and one doesn't do well, and they're in the same home environment. Why is that? Well, we don't know. But it's protective factors. How many support systems do they have that they can lean on? That's where big brothers, big sisters comes in, sometimes to have a mentor outside of, sometimes teachers, coaches, can be very, very helpful in that resiliency factor, and how they develop these things. And then in utero, if you're pregnant and you're having issues yourself with maybe you're in domestic violence, that can possibly affect the baby. All these things can contribute to this, and it can be difficult to narrow these things down. But if we have time, and I would say that's one thing that the TRC can do, is we're allowed up to about 4 hours to do an assessment, in which most practitioners have to do it within an hour. And yes, we break that time up, because there's no way anybody could really concentrate for 4 hours at a shot. And it's really to take that time to find out what's really going on. I don't know if there are any questions or anything, but that was my presentation.
Thank you very much. That was very informative. I appreciate it. And you
No
don't mind that I share your slides?
No, not at all.
And I can also share the recording of tonight too, via email to all the participants, and maybe those that couldn't join us tonight.
Sure. Yeah.
If there are any questions, I would be happy to help facilitate. There's something in the chat box. I'm not sure if could trauma cause multiple personalities? Is that what the question is?
could this cause multiple personalities? I mean, yeah, it can be part of that. I mean, you have to really think about it, because that is one way that the brain is trying to cope. So that's one thing. And then they may have symptoms that will show itself maybe with certain personalities. So it would depend on which personality and whatnot. But of course, you can have that, because with the multiple personalities, or what they have relabeled as, dissociative identity disorder, is that someone may create a childlike personality that is safe and doesn't express maybe some of these maladaptive symptoms, but then when they become this other personality, they may have those symptoms, so yeah, it's a it's boggling how smart our brains are for protecting us, so we can move on. And Barbara says, thanks again. Well done. Thank you. And she will re-watch it. All right. So that's all I see. I don't know if anybody else has anything else.
That's all I see as well, but I'd be happy to share your contact information too, if people have follow-up questions, maybe
Sure.
later.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you again for presenting. Part 3 will be next month, the second week of June.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
That's what I have. So looking forward to it.
there was a follow-up to the multiple personalities question in the Q&A.
Oh.
It's about affecting sexuality.
Okay. So it says, but affect their sexuality, knowing what sexuality they are, and they go back and forth from being yeah, that can happen with dissociative identity disorder, because of how they're splitting. Absolutely. Very, very true. And yeah, I mean, again, with complex trauma and everything being unstable, so is your so is your understanding of how you're supposed to, who you're supposed to be, how are you supposed to be. I mean, all of this internal dialogue and development and all that, yeah, you're all over the place. There's no, I mean, it's very hard. I mean, it's hard enough if you're in a stable environment to figure out who you are, and then when it's unstable and it's been so abusive that your brain decided to split off and make different identities to feel safe. I mean, it's very complex, no doubt. Dissociative identity disorder is, I see, if someone is in another personality, how do you get through to them without hurting them mentally? Yeah, that is extremely hard to do. So there's a lot of therapy that goes along with that, with trust with the therapist, which means that if you find out, you got to figure out how many personalities there are. Sometimes people could have 80, 100 different personalities. You have to try and figure out how to get every single one of those personalities to trust you, and to see if they even want to try and integrate as one, which means to that person, you have to kill off quote unquote, the other personalities. And they may not want to do that, but at least getting them to talk to each other is important. So I mean, you're talking years and years and years and years and years and years of therapy to develop such trust. It's very difficult. It can be done. It absolutely can be done. But, they have to be with the right therapist who knows what they're doing when it comes to that. Is there another one? Oh, another one. Oh, no, that's the one I think I saw. Oh. Can I get everything?
Is this the same one?
Is it the same one, maybe?
I don't think so. How do you get them out of a
Oh,
self-harm
that's
state?
another personality and they are harming themselves or in another panic state. How do you get them out of that? I think you have to, if you know what the personality is at that time, you need to probably talk to them. If they're acting as though they're a teenager, you need to talk to them as though you would a teenager. And, especially, this is something that I think therapists have to understand too. You are then jumping through the developmental stages with this client. So if they're all of a sudden then 50, you have to talk to them as though they're 50 years old. I mean, it's dependent on what personality you. That's to be respectful, and not harm them. And it's important to address what personality is in front of you, so, and that name and that everything, and do what you would do normally. So if you have somebody that's trying to harm themselves, no matter what age they are, I'm going to call for help, hopefully get them hospitalized. So it's again, very complicated. There's no easy answer. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If that's it, I will say we're
All
going to
right.
wrap up for the
Okay.
evening.
Thank
And I hope
you.
you all have a good night.
You
Enjoy some dinner and some water today.
Right? Yeah. Well, Carol, I see that you sent me another one, and I think Danielle will give out my email. Please feel free to email me and maybe we can discuss further.
Yes, I will definitely send your contact information over there.
All right. Thank you so
very much.
much. Mm-hmm.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.